The horrific racially motivated murders perpetrated by a deranged scumbag in Jacksonville at the Dollar General store. Perpetrating violence of this kind is unacceptable, and targeting people due to their race has no place in the state of Florida.
What do you make of that condemnation?
What I make of that condemnation is hollow statements. This is a governor who has done nothing but fan these types of happenings throughout our state. Look, at the end of the day, the governor has blood on his hands. He has had an all-out attack on the Black community. With his anti-woke policies, which we know very well was nothing more than a dog whistle to get folks up and riled up in the way in which it just happened on yesterday. As I listened to him for the first time with that statement, my blood is literally boiling. Myself and other representatives, particularly Black representatives, throughout the past few legislative sessions, we have repeatedly told him what his rhetoric was going to do. And that is exactly what transpired on yesterday. This is absurd, it's ridiculous. He is one of the causes to this. This is an agenda that he has been pushing since he has gotten into office. He showed us who he was when he initially ran for governor, saying, don't monkey this around, don't monkey this up. Those type of statements, it only leads to things like this.
Representative Nixon, I appreciate just so much emotion in what you're talking about. I can only imagine what you and your community are going through right now. And we know that before arriving at the Dollar General, the shooter briefly drove to Edwin Waters University, a historically Black school, calls itself Florida's first institution for the education of African Americans. How important is the school to that community, and what do you make of him going there and the fact that security stopped him and made sure that he left campus?
First of all, I want to give my condolences to the victims, the families of the victims. I am happy that security stepped up and did their job and were able to save lives. Look, again, we have leadership across this state, Republican leadership across this state, who are doing everything to continually attack Black lives, right? They are doing everything to erase Black history. They are feeding our children propaganda. All that does is lead to the devaluation of Black lives. This guy, he had no respect for the Black community. He had no respect. And my colleagues who are in leadership need to stand up and stop the mansplaining and the gaslighting and the misogynoir and the racist rhetoric that they spew time and time again on the House floor and the Senate chambers. Let's be clear. This is the same state legislature that just recently passed a bill to rename a portion of our roadways after Rush Limbaugh. That is what we're dealing with here in the state of Florida. That is why I am so angry. And then we have a very vindictive governor who, if we speak out, we're punished as elected officials. Along with Representative McCarty, sat on that House floor when he unconstitutionally came after 2 congressional Black districts to remove them. I was placed in a basement with rats because I stood up for my community. I am more than angry, and now that our students, families can no longer have their family members to come up to. Here in Florida, Governor DeSantis and the Republican Party of Florida are doing nothing but hurting us. And I am angry, and I will not continue to sit idly by.
Representative, we hear your words loud and clear, and we want to keep talking with you. The gunman used an AR-style rifle. We know that there's debate over whether to focus on this crisis at gun reform, the state level, or nationally, or whether it's a mental health crisis, or both. For states like Florida, where gun laws are really only ever loosened these days, and it feels like, and we know that Democrats are the minority in the state legislature, what do you look for change? I mean, do you feel like the answer's in Washington?
I feel like it has to be a top-down, bottom-up approach, right? I feel that all of the elected leaders need to come together and push out this hateful rhetoric, which has just been exacerbated since around 2015, 2016. I feel that our community members need to hold us elected officials accountable. We work for you, right? We work for you, and you need to hold us accountable, not just at the ballot box, but year round. You need to push the policies that you deserve, right?
They do work for us, but the media has taken on a government stance of its own, to the point that you don't buck the media. If you buck the media, you're going to wind up being engulfed, similar towards other politicians. I ain't going to mention no names right now, but the media are the ones that feed off of the American system, because it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat, they still get their same amount of money. They still have their TV stations. They still have their radio stations. They still have their newspaper agencies. It's the media that feeds off of the system. And some of these people that works for the media, they're not just making just mediocre money. Some of them are making on up there big, I'm talking about millions of dollars. I mean, if you get a big enough following pertaining to your support base, some of these people make in the millions of dollars just because they're in control of the big mic. Something has taken our American government over. And whenever Donald Trump talks about the media basically being imploded to the point of them being corrupt, that the system is rigged, he couldn't have nailed it on the head no better than what he has. And whenever they talk about a two-tier system, it's not a two-tier system. It's actually a three-tier system. And if certain people, either in the media or certain people in political circles, it doesn't matter if it's local, state, or federal, if certain people don't like you, what she just said about being punished and being put down into a room where rats are, is absolutely correct. And we want to point our fingers at all these other countries, especially Russia. And don't get me wrong, maybe these countries do need to be brought out, pertaining to their wrongs against their own personal citizens. But yet, no, we sit idly by and sit back and watch our own citizens be torn to shreds because they get up and they voice their opinion about a certain particular subject matter. Now, if that is not the pot calling the kettle black, I will kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. Because that's exactly what it is. America has turned into a hypocrite hypocrisy type do as I say and not as I do approach. And they've been this way now for quite some times, especially whenever you get to talking about gun violence. Oh, they'll get on TV and they'll talk about the gun violence, and they'll keep it on the front burner for maybe a half a day or maybe even 2 days, but then that'll go away. And then it won't be long till something else will pop up. There'll be another event that will be just as bad, if not worse. Then that'll go away. That'll simmer down. And it won't be long until something else will pop up. And what we're trying to do here is, this is my analogy of it, they're trying to juggle too many balls, and because they're trying to multitask, they can't efficiently do what they need to do with the first or two balls or the third ball, much less the 15th or the 16th ball, whenever you're sitting there trying to juggle too many balls. Because odds are, whenever you drop one ball in the middle of your routine, you're probably going to drop all of them. And that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. Our government has been taken over by the media press. The media press gets on there and voices out their opinions about how that they feel about certain subjects, and there's nothing wrong with that. But whenever it takes presidency over everything else, kind of like what's going on with Donald Trump right now, with the court system, that should have never, as far as I'm concerned, never gotten in the newspapers, not the way that it did. Yes, it should have made it to the newspapers, but not on the front page, because it's basically eaten up all the other availability space of other major stories that need to be put on that front page. And to be quite honest with you, I think the American people has gotten sick of hearing it a day in, day out, day in, day out. I mean, it's very obvious what's happened here. Whenever Donald Trump gets to talking about how that his election was stolen, if anything has stolen Donald Trump's election, it's been himself and COVID. COVID had a big factor to do with Donald Trump's presidency, because COVID fell in right whenever Donald Trump was president. But the next thing that falls in pertaining to Donald Trump continues to keep activating his mouth before he activates his brain, and he gets on TV and he says stuff that comes back and bites him in the tail. That's what's happening with Donald Trump, and it's finally brewed. It's taken this long for it to brew, after all these different impeachments and all this free media time and eating up taxpayers' time. After all this length of time since January the 6th, it's just now beginning to start heating up the way that it should have been heated up within days of after January the 6th. And right now, we should have already got over January 6th, and we should have be focused upon other matters, such as our streets being inundated with all the drugs, the homeless, the gun violence, what's going on the border pertaining to the illegals that's coming over the border, pertaining to our jails being full, pertaining to how that our country is $30-something trillion in debt. There's all kinds of major issues pertaining to China possibly going to war with Japan, North Korea wanting to start basically a nuclear war. Why that fire hadn't been put out is still beyond me. You got the ordeal going on right now with Russia, basically the David and Goliath scenario, towards basically everybody watching Goliath eat up David, pertaining to David being the Ukrainians and Goliath being the Russians. And then you got other matters that's stirring up in Africa and India and Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and other places. So it's too many cooks in the kitchen. And because it's too many cooks in the kitchen, and because we don't know how to prioritize what story needs to be on the front page versus what story don't need to be on the front page, it's gotten confusing. And I don't have to tell you what the Bible says about confusion and who the author of confusion is. What really bothers me is the end game. Where are we going with all this? All this confusion, all this madness, all this gun violence, all these drugs, being $30-something trillion in debt, the problems going on across the pond in other areas all over the world, the environmental problems pertaining to global the planet heating up, and etc., with all the vicious, outlandish forces of nature that's been bombarding the world now in the past. It's really intensified just within the past few years. I guess since COVID has hit, we've been focusing more on other areas, and one of those areas that you cannot ignore is the area whenever you have not millions, but billions of dollars worth of damage, just like the fire out there in Hawaii. You can't ignore that. There's no way to ignore a story like that. What's causing that? The planet is heating up. Why is the planet heating up? Because we have deliberately ignored the facts for the past 30 years, or at least 20 years, whenever Al Gore brought it to the American people's attention. And basically the Tennesseans punished him and chastised him because he was more concerned about tomorrow versus today. And that's basically what it comes down to. Al Gore was concerned about our tomorrow 20 years ago of today. And guess what? We are now eating our own words. It is now backfiring on us. And this is just one example of that.
And you know, at the end of the day, we need common sense gun reform. We do, but also as elected officials, we need to be accountable for the words that come out of our mouths time and time again, for the policies that we push, for the communities and families that we are hurting. I have families calling me day in and day out saying they can no longer afford Florida. They do not feel safe. The NAACP issuing a travel advisory, that is real. That is what's happening in the state of Florida. And yet, time and time again, when I am on the House floor, when I am telling all the
I was in Florida in 2006, leading in different times from 206 up until basically 213. And I was told in the early parts of experimenting down in Florida that Florida had become so expensive that the average native Floridian down there basically can no longer afford their taxes. They can no longer afford the insurance. They can no longer afford all the other issues going on down there. And it's basically driving them poor people into other areas like Kentucky and Tennessee that don't have the high tax base and a place where you can still build your own house and wire your own house and plumb your own house and do things efficiently. Of course, you can't turn the electricity on until it all gets inspected. You can't turn the plumbing on until it all gets verified that it's right. But it's so many areas that you can save money in living in these. I'm just comparing just two states. I don't know how it is in Virginia and West Virginia and all them other places. But I'm just comparing two states that it's so much cheaper to live in these states than it is to go live in Florida. Florida has been, their market has been over-marketed for the past 30 plus years with every banker, every business entrepreneur, every ball field successful player, every lawyer, every judge, anybody that's been successful in their lives with basically a deep bank account. Whenever they get ready to retire, they go down and retire down in Florida. Well, what that's doing, that is raising the market of everything up. Not just land, but everything, to the extent that now your average Floridians can no longer live in the state of Florida. Even those that had been inherited that property for years and years and years, and let's say they own the property. Let's say they actually own the property. They're not paying no type of mortgage on the property. Well, by the time the taxes is due, by the time you have to pay taxes every time you get on the roadway to go over a bridge, by the time you have to pay all the other high prices that Florida pushes off on everybody down in that area, it's basically out-marketed the very people that organized and brought Florida into being the great state that it is. So what she's talking about here, I can relate to.
All the folks, what's happening in our state, in the House floor from leaders, we get microaggressions. We get, oh, that's not real. But again, you have a governor who cares more about pandering to a base of voters, not even caring about what's happening here in our state of Florida and the 8,000 educator shortage that we have, right? The property insurance crisis that we're dealing with, the rising rent cost. No, he wants to be vindictive to black.
You got over a dozen major insurance companies that have defaulted on protecting their clients and basically has walked out of Florida. They've left and left everybody high and dry. And those that can afford insurance on their condominium or whatever that they may have are paying right now 3 to 4 times more than what they should be paying or what they was paying going back about 15 or 20 years ago. So it's basically it's engulfing itself it's engulfing itself, and the people that it's affecting on the first level will be the poor people, the laborers, the middle class people. Those will be the people that will feel the crunch the quickest and the hardest. Those are the people that's getting run out of Florida. That's not just happening in Florida. That's happening all over this country. If you get to looking at what's happening out in California, the reason why a great deal of those people have resorted to drugs is because they have lost hope. And because they have lost hope, they really don't have no other true momentum towards living. So waste your life on drugs. That way you'll be happy while you're dying. And that's sad that the rich man, the conglomerates, the one percenters have allowed for this to happen to this great nation. And that's exactly what's happened. And what she's talking about, accountability issues, is absolutely right. Until we as a nation are going to hold our people accountable, we're going to continue to go down this endless infestation of perilous times that have befallen us, to the point that now it's not even safe to put our children on a school bus and let them go to school. You know, I got a granddaughter that just come into the world about 3 months ago. It's not going to be but about 8 years from now, and I'm hopefully still going to be living. She's going to be having to be schooled. She's going to have to be educated in getting out into the real world towards knowing what to do and how to survive. The state that we're heading in right now, the trajectory that we're going in right now, I don't even know if it would be safe for her to get out of the house 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now, much less go to public functions or go to school or even be in church anymore. The whole country is unraveling, and obviously nobody is wanting to do anything about it because they don't know what to do about it. We know there's a mass problem going on. It doesn't matter if it's in Florida or wherever, but we're not addressing the problems. Why are we not addressing the problems? Because we are being diverted around the problems and focusing on stuff like Donald Trump that we've been talking about now for how many years? Talk about a diversion, talk about a smokescreen. We need to quit focusing on the things that are behind us and focus more on the things that are ahead of us if we're going to have any type of future at all.
Because it gives him points in poll numbers. That's what we're dealing with. America, you are in danger, girl. We must stop Ron DeSantis in his tracks. I am not an angry black woman. I am a woman who is speaking truth to power to let you all know this man means us no good. And it is evident by what transpired here yesterday in Jacksonville, Florida.
State Representative Angie Nixon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And that's the very reason why that I say what I say, that neither party is qualified any longer to run our affairs. The State of the Union has failed us. The State of the Union wanted to come to the South. They wanted to whip our tails. They wanted to tell us how the cow was going to eat the cabbage. Till finally the South gave up. They said, okay, we surrender. We'll let you have it. Well, they've had it all these years. And look at where we are today with the State of the Union. Our republic is basically busted. Busted. So whenever I look at both parties, they're a failure. And until we're willing to accept that, and until we're willing to re-engineer a brand new party or a whole new system, we're only going to be like a dog running around again and again and again. We're moving, but we're not going nowhere towards chasing after our tails. Basically, being spooked by our own shadows. And to think that our great nation was built upon people that had great courage. You know, it really makes me sick to think that me living here in Northwest Tennessee, less than probably 10 miles away from where Davy Crockett last lived with his mother in a little town called Rutherford, Tennessee, of the way that the people have rejected this message, but yet now they want to stand under the umbrella of all this courageousness towards, oh, Tennessee, they're the volunteer state. Oh, Tennessee was some of the first ones to stand up for their patriotism. Well, if that be the case, something's went on here, because for an individual such as myself to be persecuted the way that I've been persecuted for standing up for peace, something is wrong with that picture. And whenever it comes to the courts in Weakley County, I'm going to ask them, are they willing to go stand on the front lines pertaining to stopping all the fentanyl and stopping all the illegals from coming over here? Is Johnson willing to actually put a gun or a sword in his hand and go to the front lines and say, you know what, I'm gonna fix this problem, or I'm gonna die fixing it? Are any of our politicians willing to do that? They get on TV and they talk the talk, but none of them is willing to walk the walk. And that's one reason why that we're in the shape that we're in. They was so concerned about wanting to put a felony onto my life. Man, they was going to put a felony onto my life, and they made me do that little test where you put the little thing in your mouth. That way they can check your DNA. And I'm glad they've done that. I'm glad they've done my DNA, because I don't have nothing to hide. Yes, I've been all over the countryside. I've traveled from coast to coast in the past 3 years. I mean, from coast to coast 3 different times in the past 15 years. 8 of those years was the times that I was active towards doing it, and never broke the law, never raped nobody, never killed nobody. And every job, other than maybe a couple, was always uppity up on the books towards being acknowledged with Uncle Sam. So I'm glad they took my DNA. That way they can compare my DNA with all these other people's DNAs. Because usually your DNA, it ain't going to fail you ordinarily. Unless somebody, converts the DNA, corrupts the DNA. But to think that my people right here in Weakley County, the very county that my grandfather lived in, and there's no doubt that my great-grandfather that worked for Obion County, before counties was really counties back then, established counties back then. I mean, they was and they wasn't. Not like they are today. But to think that my great-grandfather was willing to sacrifice all. His wife was willing to sacrifice all. Their children was willing to sacrifice all for the benefit of the people, and for the people just to give up on the community, give up on Cydonia, give up on Sharon, give up on Kenton, give up on various towns. It's basically now drying up and turning into nothing more than a retirement center. To think that this is going on is absolutely appalling. Of what the elders or the baby boomers has allowed to bring upon to we the people. And to this day, they're still working in their positions. They still have their loyal jobs, and they're still banking on their retirement, and they still have their house that's paid for and their big fat bank account. Because now most of them are probably making somewhere around $75, $80, maybe even $100,000 a year, pushing a pencil. In the meantime, our country is going to pot. They can't even keep us safe, not just safe physically, but safe also with the computer system toward being hacked, and they're not effectively doing their jobs. And to think that we, the people, have said idly by for all this length of time and did not punish these people and allowed for this to come upon to society like this is absolutely appalling. And I don't blame this woman for getting emotional, because I'm pretty sure that she has racked her head, similar towards how some of the representatives up in Nashville, Tennessee got basically debunked, fired, because they was standing up for the same issues pertaining to violence. And of course, because they was black and the vast majority of the party up there in Nashville is white, they got reprimanded severely. And it wasn't until it all got on tape And thank God it did. Because if it didn't, I'm pretty sure it would have been another unknown lynching. And no, it may not have been an actual throwing a rope around a limb and lynching somebody, but you can lynch people in other areas, metaphorically speaking, and still destroy their life. And still destroy their life. And that's where they was going with one of the representatives from Memphis and another one, I think, from up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Both those guys was black, and they was literally going to railroad the you-know-what out of them until that imagery of what was going on in the Capitol circulated on national news and become a hot topic to talk about and look at. And now we're talking about basically the same thing with gun violence, and it's just endless. It's almost like an infestated sore that, you know, once you think that it's starting to heal, and then all of a sudden you hit the scab of it, and you knock the scab off, and then it's got to go back through its healing stage again and again and again. And you know, eventually, if you do a festated sore that way again and again and again, it becomes infected. And once that sore becomes infected, then you're dealing with other elements other than a scab pertaining to a sore. You may be dealing with poison in the system. It may set up gangrene. You may have to have whatever is infesting the way that it's infesting. You may have to have it amputated. I mean, if you don't cut things off at the bud and you let it fester, you let it grow, you kick it down the road, you kick the can down the road, hoping that somebody else is going to come up with a magical solution, being able to wave a magical wand over the problem and suddenly it's just going to up and go away, is absolutely insane. And that's the gear, that's the trajectory that America has been on now ever since basically Ronald Reagan's administration. Ever since we left Ronald Reagan's administration, our country has been on a trajectory of disaster. And if you can't understand that and see that, then obviously you're unqualified to see it, or you just don't care to see it because you can't see the trees for the forest. So many people wants to live in the very moment that we're in right now. It's Biden's problem. It's Biden is the one that causes it. Biden is the one. It's the Biden administration that's done this. And then when we get him out of office, the next thing you know, whoever that they elect the next time, it's their problem. It's that person. That person has made a mess out of this. And for some reason, it's almost like America has been bewitched or under some sort of a spell to where they can't see the trees for the forest. And they don't understand that you've got to go back to its original core of origin. That's the only reason why that I continue to keep bringing up some of the things that I keep bringing up about my life, especially whenever it all began over in Kenton, Tennessee in 1983, and I got involved with a family's life over there towards studying the Bible and wanting to know how come God spared my life, how come two miraculous hands come out of nowhere that grabbed both of my wrists that was cold in content, that an automobile should have cut me in half. I studied and I prayed and I studied and I prayed. I crammed the Bible for over a year with this family in trying to develop answers. And every time I would get close to my own answer, they would contradict me. They contradicted me on the marijuana laws pertaining to medical marijuana. And I think that was one of the main reasons why, other than them knowing my family, some of my family background, that I was basically prejudged because of what other family members have done in their lives that didn't have nothing to do with my life. Now, you talking about unfair. That's just like a lot of the elderly people here in this area knows about my great-grandfather's stance that he took with the law here, not just being a community organizer, not just being able to sell drugs because he could read the pharmacy, and not just because his wife worked as a midwife and didn't charge nobody nothing towards going around having babies. not just being a pioneer in this area, not just being a merchant in this area, but he actually took on the leadership of a judge in this area, a law enforcement agency or position. And of course, whenever the 1929 Depression hit, that basically knocked all the air out of everybody's sail. And that's whenever people started losing their shirts because they couldn't even pay their own taxes at the end of the year. That's whenever money got extremely tight, and that's whenever people had to start merging into other areas. They had to merge up into Chicago and merge up into other areas just to be able to make a living for their families. But they want to come back to finish out their remaining lives here. It hasn't been too long ago to Ed White. I said wasn't long ago. It's probably, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. Whenever I first come back here, me and him had somewhat of a conversation up here in the volunteer fire department up here in Cydonia before I realized what kind of an attitude that he had. But he made mention about, because I questioned him about Cynthia. He had a daughter my age. I went to school with her. I go, well, whatever happened to your daughter? And his reply was, well, she had to move off. She had to move down to Florida to make a living for her family. I said, well, what's wrong with that? He said, well, because I don't get to see the grandchildren, but maybe once every other year or whatever. He said, I can't afford to stay on the road and fly back and forth to see her all the time. She can't afford to come down here and see us. So that means I'm disconnected with the grandchildren. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? That may not be a bad thing, considering that it was Ed White and Cheryl White and all these other baby boomers around here, are those that was actually before the baby boomers, that allowed for the abuse behavior that went on in this community that nobody was willing to even pick up a phone and call the authorities about. And I'm pretty sure that their daughter, Cynthia, know the things that was going on because they lived right in behind our house, and I'm pretty sure she had the same concept about what was going on down here was wrong. And if the truth be known, yeah, she probably it probably made the decision towards her packing up and leaving because of all these factories that had shut down. But if the truth be known, she probably wanted to pack up and leave the area anyways. So whenever I say stuff like it couldn't have happened to a better group of people pertaining to these people that have allowed for this to come up on to our generation, allowed for all these problems to fester and now turn into what they are right now, it really couldn't have happened to a better group of people, regardless whether they can't see their grandchildren whenever they want to, because now their daughters or their sons has had to move off to find other places to make a living. Or I could go on and on and on about scenario after scenario that's happened in their lives that's basically come back and bit them in the butt. It's backfired on them. You got to go back to the core of origin. And if you can't go back to the core of origin, and if you can't put all the dots together, only putting a few of the dots together you're not going to get the full meaning or the full picture. That's kind of like people that want to believe in God and go to church, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have a wide perspective in believing the whole Bible, and you're only going to believe certain parts of the Bible, or you're going to allow for somebody to dictate to you towards what you're supposed to believe and what you're not supposed to believe, well, then you need to leave that group of people and find somebody else that you can work with towards believing the whole Bible and not just part of the Bible. That's going back to the dots. If you can't put all the dots together to get the full picture, then you're not going to get the full picture. You're only going to get half of the picture. And a lot of times, half of the picture is a distorted picture. That's the reason why that our ancestors put it into their law to tell not just the truth, but the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help us God. In other words, it covers it all the way around in every perspective, top, bottom, 360 degrees, that there's no way to deviate around from the picture if you're not telling the whole picture. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. So help us God. And that's where America has gotten off beat. They've gotten off a beat, and they've gotten off a beat towards holding these people accountable that get up there and make this big money, and they showboat. They take over the media. The media basically takes over the positions that puts us in the position that we're all in right now. And until we're willing to do something about it, my friends, it's only going to drastically get worse. It is so sad the way that America has been hijacked right now. It is really so sad. It's almost as if we've all been held hostage. And you know, one of those problems is I mention this from time to time, is your big conglomerates. And I'm just going to throw Walmart out there in comparison to Target and all those other big retailers out there. But the big sharks wanted to eat up all the bigger fish that basically ended the mama papa shops. Well, whenever they was eating up all the mama papa shops, they was also cutting corners by going overseas and getting stuff on pennies on a dollar in comparison to what we could make it and brand it and put it on the shelves over here in America. So because of it, all these bigger sharks have now eaten up all the bigger fish, the mama papa businesses, and now the major conglomerates, the giants, has no other choice but to still continue to get their stuff overseas. That basically is pennies on a dollar, because America got the cart in front of the horse pertaining to labor issues, pertaining to all these unions that jacked all the prices up, that basically was no way to compete with all these other countries, because they was only paying some of their people $2 an hour in some of these sweatshops, compared to us having to pay $15 an hour over here. Our General Motors that was paying $60 an hour after you get through paying your benefits and your union dues and your insurance and everything else, in comparison to somebody down in Mexico doing the exact same thing for less than $20 an hour. How can you compete with that on a labor issue? You can't. And that's the reason why we got so downstream pertaining to all these major retailers that now said, well, the hell with mama papa hardware stores, the hell with mama papa retail stores, the hell with mama papa whatever. And that's whenever they all ganged up together and they all put their money together and they started pooling, and the next thing you know, all the mama papa stuff died. And now we're being regulated by the 1%ers that have done this to us, but yet no, nobody is holding them responsible and accountable for what that they have done. In the meantime, oh, we still get our little trinkets. Oh, we still get this, we still get that. But most of the time, whenever we get something on sale or whatever, we only look at it or use it, and some of us don't even use it, and then we throw it back in a corner somewhere and kick it around, and it gets put in a catch-all, in the catch-all corner, or up in the attic, or in your garage, stored full of a bunch of stuff that you don't even know what you got, because you got so much stuff that you don't need, stuff that you're never going to use. But we're keeping them alive, ain't we? Because we're taking it off the shelves, as these major retail stores are getting it from them and putting it on the shelves, and we're taking it off the shelves and putting it in other areas. Even though we don't use it, we're still. It's an endless cycle, is what it is, and it's really horrifyingly sad, because the people in charge have allowed for this to occur. Thanks again. Good luck to all of us. And all we can say is shalom. May peace be unto us all, and may heaven help us all in these desperate times that we're living in today, that has been brought upon to us, as far as I'm concerned, illegitimately by the wicked and the demonic, the greedy and the selfish, just like the oil petroleum companies that did not want to listen to the signs. And now we're seeing weather weather events happening right now like we've never seen before. That's only going to intensify and get worse until we all put our minds together and we try to fix the problem, just like the gun problem. You cannot continue to kick the can down the road. As my grandmother used to always tell us boys, money does not grow on trees. And the way that we was raised, if you didn't earn it, you didn't get it. You done without. Well, today in society, they feel like that they're entitled to everything. They're entitled to everything. Oh, I deserve this. I deserve that. So you really can't blame the people out in California that goes through that snatch and grab. I'm not saying it's right because it's wrong. Anytime you are breaking the law, it's wrong. Much less stealing. Talks in the Bible about thou shalt not steal. But you brought this upon to yourselves because now them same people that wanted Gucci, that wanted all them name brand things, ain't going to never be able to afford them. So they just basically all get together and they start working in their strength in numbers. They start working in strength and they go in and basically mortify a store and take it over and walk out with sometimes a $500,000 worth of merchandise, depending upon what store it is, depending upon what they go in and get. Good luck to all of us. Shalom.